Alexa, start Sweet Hug.
Hello, Sweet Hug.
That's the closest that she can get to pronouncing the name of the conference. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. I'm so happy to have so many fellow C# people in the audience. I'm excited about this because normally I end up having to talk to a lot of JavaScript developers about different ways that they can build their APIs. So I'm much more at home talking to this crowd. So give yourself a round of applause for even trying to think about doing voice with C#. Yes. All right. I cannot see the next slide, so you're going to have to bear with me. We're going to discover the slide deck together because I had to mirror the screen. So let's start off a little bit about what we're talking about here. Most humans can hear and understand words a lot faster than they type. It's kind of amazing how successful a lot of businesses have started to get when they've moved into the voice area. The reason that I selected Alexa is because of their ability to really understand the demographic of their markets and understand how to sell things. There are many different voice platforms, but Amazon knows how to give you things very quickly and rapidly. The experience for being a developer, I think, is probably one of the easiest ways to get into voice. So how many here in the audience have actually built a voice skill for Alexa before? Anyone? I got one. Yes. There are more and more languages that are starting to be supported. For a long time, it was just English and then Japanese. So now, we actually have Dutch now. So they're getting closer. They're just inching closer to each region. Another interesting fact is that, there's a lot of amazing things about voice, but there's a lot of disappointing things about voice as well. And when I think about this, what comes to mind is, at least in the United States where I'm from, you call one of your utility companies, and they'll have voice prompts. And they'll send you down a lovely 17-layer deck of trying to get what you need. And if you say the wrong thing, you get kicked out to the beginning all over again. There's a reason for this. Developers are not very conversational. We're not good about that. We're good about the happy path. Which way do you want me to take you? And you have to tell me exactly the way you want me to go. The problem is, there is no menu for the user to know where to go. So you have to guide them. And you also need to be able to understand how much of the information you got was relevant to your situation and not just throw it away because they didn't tick every single box that you wanted to fulfill your function. Do you follow me? So that's a little bit of the journey we're going to go through today, is how to think about voice, but also how to not just do the code, but to think about how to structure your code as well. Okay? Right. So let's go through some statistics just really quick. There are quite a bit of devices out there. And this was just in 2017. That number has now doubled. And that was just in an additional year. It's a little crazy to me to think. But what's exciting about this is that even if you don't own one of these devices, although I did buy this one in Stockholm, so I know you can buy it here, you can use it on your phone now. So for iOS and Android, there is an Alexa app that you can talk directly to on the go, if you want, which is pretty cool, considering it took them the longest to do it, fighting against Google specifically. They didn't really want to have an additional assistant on their phone, so they actually blocked them for some time until finally they came to terms. So now you can actually turn the lights on and off in your house, or unlock the door for a handyman that's coming in when you're not there. It's pretty cool. What's also amazing, and this is just the United States population, we really love Prime. I don't know if you guys have Amazon Prime here or not, but you probably understand the concept is a very rapid delivery of different materials, different packages, and most Prime members have interacted with Alexa. And so these are a demographic of people that usually have money to spend. And that's something that most of the enterprise companies that I've worked with find very interesting. They would love to kind of work alongside and see how they can sell more of their products, or at least get more into the ears of their customers. Yeah, that number has also gone up a little bit as well. Does anybody know roughly how many skills are currently available in the store? Anybody? No? Yeah, that's 55,000 now. It's pretty huge, especially now that Alexa's gone more international, and they've added Spanish now, which any Spanish-speaking nation now can also use it, which is a very large population of the world. It's definitely gone up. What's interesting about this is that this just counts for one language. You can have a skill for British English, and you can have the same skill, but have it for Dutch. So this is just for one language. That means that technically you could have one product or service that can be counted for each one of those. All right. And according to Gartner, it's supposed to double itself every year by 2020, like in terms of all of the market activations that happen for this. So now that I have totally sold you all on becoming, developers overnight for voice, let's get into it a little bit. Okay, so here's an example of one of the frustrations that users can have with developers that do not think in a spherical way. They think in a hierarchical way. And you can't really do that because, again, there is no menu option, right? So this example here is for a BMW company and how they have an on and off ability to lock your car door. But they wanted it to be more conversational, this user did. And they were smart enough as a user to understand that it wasn't inherently Alexa that was the problem. It was whoever built the skill for BMW, is that they shouldn't have to, just say, I want to lock it. You should be able to check whether or not it is. But they didn't build that in. They said it doesn't matter. This is the function to lock the door. So why would they need to check if it's locked? That sounds just like bad design or bad UI, but 9 times out of 10, the developer does not have a designer for this. You get to be both sides of this. So think about that when you're doing that. Like, how would you have a conversation with a friend? How would you have a conversation with a superior or an employee? How would you have a conversation in real life? And that is usually how you should structure this. Another purpose that I didn't really appreciate was my friends, families, and neighbors. I would ask people that I didn't even really know in a coffee shop if they wouldn't mind telling me how they would respond to a question. And that was how I was able to kind of think about the different branching that would happen during a conversation. It's really kind of fascinating. All right, so why should you build for voice? When I first started this, I understood that inherently conversations are just a little bit more complicated than I gave them credit for. Part of the reason I became a developer is because I was an introvert and I would love to just hide in the basement and code all day. But when I was building something for human beings, I had to understand a couple of truths. So Paul Grice is considered one of the grandfathers of voice conversations way back in the day when this first started in like the early 1900s. And he put about 4 maxims that you need to keep in mind whenever you are designing an experience. Okay? You just need to be truthful with your users, be brief, and please do not take a long time to respond. Be relevant to the actual question that they asked or their intentions and not give them something else. And be very clear. If you can just follow these 4 things, which I felt I could probably follow even though I wasn't a designer, you can usually retain your audience and you won't lose all the users that are frustrated. So remember the 4 things: quality, quantity, relevance, and the manner in which you deliver. Okay, you follow me? Very cool. This is probably one of my favorite parts. Okay, so let's talk about the cooperative principle, shall we? How many of us are used to the happy path? Anybody? Yes, yes. So the difference between this path and that path is that one is much more understanding of the user, right? Because when somebody uses a voice skill, they're normally semi-distracted because they don't have a screen that they have to focus on. They could be tying their shoe, feeding their child, putting clothes on, running throughout the house. Whatever they're doing, they're not going to give you 100% of their focus and attention. That means that unless you structure this in a way that works with your user, you're going to have a lot of, I'm sorry I didn't understand what you said because you didn't give me Tuesday at 6 a.m. You just said, set my alarm. We all understand you probably need more information as a developer in order to go set that alarm, but you have to remember things as you go. As you go, you need to retain what those are. It could be that the user gives you all of the information you need in one fell swoop, and that's great. But I have found that a lot of users will give you pieces of it. So that means think about the way you write a function, yes? So that means that a lot of your parameters might be optional, or you might have to check to see if you actually have each one fulfilled first, and then retain one in memory and say, okay, well, I know that you said 6 a.m., but what day is that for? So it does two things. One, if you ever get disconnected from the user, at least you have that information. And two, it shows the user you were listening. You actually did hear them. They aren't just wrong, okay? Believe it or not, people have quite emotional reactions to voice assistants, and you want to kind of keep that down, because it's very frustrating if they don't actually know what the options are and all you told them is you were wrong, try it again. They're like, well, I don't know what to try again. I don't have a manual. Like, what am I supposed to do? One of the worst voice skills that I've ever come across was built by a company who decided to ship all their users PDF manuals of how to use their voice skill. And I said, well, I'm not going to remember that if I'm in the middle of fixing breakfast. Hold on, let me go get that PDF so I know how to actually interact with you. Like, that's terrible. So everything should be guided. A user's not going to know what to say, so treat them that way. Say, okay, if you know what to say, you should be able to shortcut it once you get used to it and allow them to do that, but also be prepared to guide. Now, are you structuring things a little differently in your mind now when you're doing architecture? It's interesting to have this challenge. I think it really kind of renewed my love of APIs once I got to do this kind of thing. Yes, try not to do the endless question chain. That seems to also be very frustrating. Think about it this way. You've heard the phrase like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, kind of a thing. If you've given the user nothing but just asked them a bunch of questions, they're going to be really exhausted after a while and think, what am I getting out of this? All I do is keep answering your questions. I'm not really getting anything from it. Be prepared to give something very rapidly. Because remember, there is no hierarchy. So the user can start at any point in time of whatever your skill does, at any point, which is cool because that kind of brings me to like the shortcut realm, right? Your super users that have used this every day or all the time will start discovering that I don't really want to do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'd rather just get to 7 because I know really what you need for that. They tend to start really enjoying your skill more, because it will reward users that tend to come back time and time again, which is what companies want. They want to see interactions go up. They want to see those metrics go up. And these are things that we can just do as developers, that whenever you start a project like this, most like managers and product owners do not know to ask these things, do not know how to guide a user through this. So you get to be kind of both sides of the coin for a little bit, only because you have to be intelligent enough to understand what the design choices should be, because you will write your code in the manner of those design choices. Okay. All right. So there's a couple of different ways that somebody can ask a question. One person might say, I'd like to order a taxi. Their intent or their like trigger phrase really would be the order right intent. That reminds me a little bit of just what my function name might be, right? A user also might say, please, can you book me a ride? They both are the same intention, the same action, okay? So when I use the word intent, and we'll go through a little bit more terminology in a second, that's what I mean. Is that there can be many utterances for each intended behavior, right? All right, so like what are these opportunities that we have with all of these voice interfaces? Because a lot of them are either kitchen timers or a game or something that seems like it wouldn't be useful all the time, like registering your refrigerator for Frigidaire. That might be that might be fun the first time, but you never get to use it again because once it's registered, it's registered. So I see a lot of like one-time use things. But there are some really successful companies in different industries, and I kind of wanted to show you them as an example. Okay, I don't really know at this part of the world what your bread and butter is for large enterprise scale, so I'm interested after this if you want to tell me whether you're in finance or you're in some sort of insurance or what you are working on, what industry. I'm interested in that. But I have some examples for you. Some use cases. So the first one that comes to mind that's very successful is Domino's Pizza. I think you have a similar like Pizza Hut here as well. They were one of the very first large companies to successfully use Amazon Alexa's platform to actually increase their bottom line. They made more money. So how much more? They actually took over an additional 13% of the entire pizza market just with their voice skill alone. That is huge money. That's great. And this is why. If you were to use their skill, you have to first have started a profile, have had some favorites by going to their website and ordering online. But once you've done that once, you will find that a lot of people who are in the middle of watching Game of Thrones can't really be bothered to pull out their phone and start messing around to try to order something or even get on the phone. What they found was easier was to do a two-step process where they would say, Alexa, tell Domino's Pizza I want to order a pizza. The response would be, great, would you like your usual? The answer was yes. And the final response is, great, it will be there in 20 minutes. That was the end of the whole experience. Why? Because they already had an account that was linked. They already had a payment on file for them. You don't have to take them through the myriad of different possibilities of toppings and crusts and whether or not you want gluten-free. They already knew who their user was, and they leveraged that because the game of 20 questions doesn't really belong in voice. You really should use voice for repetition, things that you can do often. This is where it really shines. So it took so much less time. Even if I had pulled it up their app, it was still faster for me to do that process. So think about opportunities where it would be better to do it in voice than it would be even to do it on an app. Now, when it comes to filing taxes, I mean, I don't know if you guys have the tax experience that we do in the States, but it's quite long, and anything that's a long form, you probably don't want to do on voice. You want to leave that to the browsers that do it very well, right? Or the mobile apps that do it well. This is just one, again, we want brief, clear, relevant, right? Another example in the finance industry is American Express. So I was chatting earlier with another speaker today, and I'd like to bring up that lots of people are concerned about the security of hearing your bank balance or something said out loud in your living room, right? But remember, not even 10 years ago, everybody was saying there's no way that Americans would feel secure enough with checking their account balance on their phone. And yet here we are. Okay? Because there's always a little bit of trade-off there for convenience. And American Express has found that their engagement has soared since they've been able to do this. Because it takes them less time, because instead of having constant logins, once your account is linked with Amazon's account, you're signed in. So you don't have to worry about doing that and messing around. You just say, hey, what was my total I spent yesterday? What is my total balance now? When is my next pay date? Those questions you can just ask really quick, and it was relevant to you. It's not just a frequently asked questions generic response. It's specific to you. And that's really all you needed to know. And that took you, 2 seconds, 3 seconds to get the response. So that has been very successful. And now that American Express was one of the first ones to come out, a bunch of banks, not just in the United States, but all over the world, have also followed suit and started doing voice skills as well. So it's interesting. If you have one of your banks, I would encourage you to look into it and see if they have a voice skill out there. The next one is something called Campbell's Kitchen. So if you're in the retail area at all as a developer, there's a lot of moving parts to that. Something that Campbell's Kitchen had problems with was getting people to buy their brand, because oftentimes bloggers on YouTube and stuff would just suggest generic brands of, different kinds of their products, and it was starting to really affect them. And so they wanted to kind of also be like the go-to place for recipes, right? But they took it one step further. So instead of saying, hey, what can I make with, mushroom soup, they would take them not only through what the recipe would be, they would set up front what the ingredients were and ask them, do you have this in your kitchen? If you say no, they say, no problem. We've added it to your Amazon Prime shopping cart if you want to check it out. So the user didn't have to go find that exact size, that exact type of mushroom soup. They just had it already there should they want to have it sent, right? And it sounds like a small thing, but to a lot of users, they just didn't have to think about it. And that was great. So once again, that absolutely upticks their bottom line. Very small thing, right? You'd be surprised how much of a response it started getting when there are so many recipe skills out there. But this one did one extra step and made it easier. Another one is the area that's kind of much more gamification. Okay, so let's say you work for a cool company, but it's not necessarily something that is easy to sell, like pizza or, soup, right? Maybe it's something that's a little bit more like a cloud provider or something like that. So oftentimes gamification will come into it. Like maybe they wanted to be a sponsor of some sort of a skill, right? The way that Anheuser-Busch did it, Anheuser-Busch is the parent company of Budweiser, okay? So they were having difficulty selling their weakest beer, which is their Ultra 95, basically water, but, And so they're like, how do we sell more of this? Because you can't actually buy a beer through Alexa, like that doesn't work. So how do you sell more of this? So the way that they decided to market was to have a skill built that would take in whatever the user had that day. So if the user said, I had 5 beers today, or I had 10, or I lost count at 15, but let's just say 15 plus, or whatever it was. And then based on the number that you tell of the type of beer you had, it would tell you how many push-ups you had to do to burn the calories. Which sounds ridiculous, but it exploded. Everyone loved it because it did 2 things. One, it encouraged people to be exercising, and 2, then it also was able to point out how much less calories there was in the Ultra 95 and how many less push-ups you had to do if you had chosen to drink that beer. So it sounds ridiculous, but lots and lots of people used it, especially on college campuses. So it became kind of a whole game in as of itself. And when you think about that, how little math went into that. It's just not a lot. Think about the way you would have built an API for that. It's not that complicated, but it was very effective. So now the question is, what do you want to build? I'm interested in what you guys are starting to think about. I wonder if this will actually work. Please don't pop. Oh, well. See if it'll actually, maybe it'll work. Let's see. This is an example of a skill that I did. I always, by the way, for my presentations, I usually will do some video recording because I never know how the internet's going to behave. So this one was an example skill that I had built, and I think, hopefully, it'll work.
Alexa, start Jedi Master.
Oh, nope.
Say, these are not the droids you're looking for.
Wow.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
Hello, KC.net.
So interesting how that was louder when I unplugged it than it was when I plugged it in. So tell you what, let's just see if she can do it here. All right. Alexa, start Jedi Master.
I'm ready to become a Jedi like you.
Welcome to the dark side.
Get out of my head.
Say, hello, sweetheart.
Hello, sweetheart.
Cancel.
May the Force be with you.
Okay. That was better than the last one. I've gotten sweet dog. I've gotten sweet Uggs. I've heard... So sweetheart's pretty nice. I think sweetheart's pretty nice. Sorry about that. So now that you kind of have seen like a couple of examples of just the skills that I've written, I got to write that basically in 1 hour. I mean, there was not a lot to it, and we're going to go through that in a minute. So let's talk about the different kinds of skills you can produce. The flash briefing skill is probably the most used skill. So think about any sort of a news or like weather or maybe a daily joke. This is great for that because it just aggregates all the different skills that are in this category that the user has subscribed to. And then just say, hey, what's my flash briefing today? And it'll tell me the weather, tell me the daily joke, developer news of the day, whatever I want. So the purpose of this is to be very brief. Think about it as a spoken Twitter. Okay, like a spoken Twitter feed. Think about it that way. So it's very brief things, but it also pumps up engagement. So if you want to do something where you're relevant in the user's live every day, doing a flash briefing skill is an excellent way to do that. Smart home skill is what started everything. The very first commercial for Alexa was turning the lights on, right? That is what a smart home skill is. The way that you would build this is it's a fire and forget. So Alexa would basically reach out to your API and say, hey, I told you to turn the lights on. Bye. And that's it. So hopefully you turned the lights on. In other words, you don't have to formulate a vocal response for her because she's not going to respond. What's going to happen is whatever you decided to happen, right? Whether that's to turn on the vacuum, turn on the lights, lock the door, whatever you want to do. That's a smart home skill. But the one that I just built is a custom skill. I would say these are the more interesting ones to me because you actually can cheat and do smart home things as well. What I like is this is the conversation part, okay? Whereas the first two don't require any sort of real go back and forth with a user, this one does. So what I've put up here is just a basic back and forth of what it would look like. The customer would ask a question, and it would, within the voice interface itself, which is the NLP engine that runs Alexa, would identify your skill's name and understand the customer's request, and based on what the customer's request was, would map it to that intent, remember? And then would just fire that intent off to your service and would expect a JSON response formulated of what she has to say. If you notice down here at the bottom, there's like an extra step you can do within the Alexa app itself, you can have a graphical response. So it's fully HTML supported. You can put videos in there. You can put like any number of things. I think it's really useful for a summary of whatever the conversation has been. So instead of sending a graphical response every time, maybe just at the end, or if you give directions, summarize directions, things like that. And that's only going to live inside of the mobile app itself. So if the user's not anywhere near the mobile app, you have to be aware that your skill should function without it. Okay, so that's just really helpful, especially if you want to spy on your children and see if they're using any of the skills when you're not home, because it will give a summary within the app as to which skills have been fired. Pretty cool. So let's talk about the individual components, right? Intents, we understand a little bit, hopefully, how to do those. You have to think about them as the events that fire. Secondly are utterances. Those are the specific words or phrases that the user can say to invoke those intents. The invocation name, which is the way in which the user speaks to get into your skill. It doesn't have to match the name of your skill. The name of your skill might be this long thing, especially, I guess, if you're in Finland, it'd be huge, you know. But really, it's just the brief thing that it says, Alexa, like start the name of this skill. For example, Sweet Egg was the name of that skill. Before then, it was Jedi Master. That's just the name, the invocation name of the skill. Are you all with me? Cool. Lastly, we say service. Hopefully you understand what that is. The service's responsibility is to formulate the response in JSON. Fifth one is portal configuration. That controls the publishing of your skill. You will spend a lot of time here because you'll have to tweak things. This is just the configuration of where things are plugged in for your API endpoint. It's also the place that you will add different sample utterances to train, because you are really training the way Alexa's supposed to identify which intent you're getting into. There's also another section in there to handle like any fallback behavior. So when Alexa doesn't understand, what would you like her to say? So portal configuration on you, good friends. There is, however, an Alexa CLI tool. Once you get good at some of this stuff, there's lots of shortcuts. You can do this completely command line if you'd like and automate a bunch of scripts to do that. Okay, so this is an example of the portal. I can also log in and show it to you, but this is the testing screen. So the good news is if you don't want to go out and buy one of these, although I think everybody should probably have a device, it's not necessary. So if you'd like, you can just do everything in the browser. You can do all your testing there. You can type as well. So if you're on, let's pretend that you're on a plane with Wi-Fi. Do you have that? Do you have that in Europe? Do you have Wi-Fi on planes? Okay, sometimes, okay, cool. We only have it over land in the States, so sometimes I'll be like, I'm bored, I'm going to work on my Alexa skill. Take down the whole Wi-Fi, pushing it to Azure, But sometimes I don't want to make noise. Sometimes I get tired of just doing the talking thing, so you can also type it out. But beware, sometimes it's useful to just speak because you'll find that she'll misunderstand you. And that's part of a user's experience, right? If you type it perfectly, of course she'll understand it, right? So just be aware that there are many different ways that you can test. And this is a great screen. It's pretty easy to get started on it. And it also shows you not only the JSON you provided, but the JSON that Amazon provided to you. So if you are having any sort of malformed JSON issues, this is a great place to also look at it. Here's just an example of me typing something in. To open the skill, you can say start the skill. And this is kind of what it looks for that output. Okay? Cool. All right, the visual components are pretty cool. We call them cards. That's the ones that show up inside of the app itself. It's just a screenshot from one example of the skill called Tide Pooler. What's great about this is that as a non-designer, the default template looks just fine, so you don't have to mess around if you don't want to. I tend not to mess around. I like to use what's built in. That way, every time there's a new version of that OS that comes up, it kind of scales with it, so I like that. There's many different ways you can do that. Another way you can kind of leverage a visual component, if you want, is a tethered screen. This is an excellent example of the use of SignalR. Anybody familiar with SignalR? A couple of people? Yeah. So I didn't mess around with WebSockets until I was asked to do a presentation on stage where I both talked to Alexa and also had things change in the background of a website while it was happening. Just like, tell me what your name is. And like, I think it's Rebecca. It's like, Alexa, we've got Rebecca here today. And so all of a sudden her name would go up on the screen, or it would change color, or we would ask to go to the next slide. And so the way that was accomplished was with the WebSockets, we just happened to use the SignalR library to do that. And it's very painless to do. And we just used that with like a basic React front end. So that was pretty cool. So there's lots of things you can do that kind of make it feel very magical if you're interested in that. The best company example I have is right up there is Nestle. It's a company that's very large. They actually are one of the largest that owns water, bottled water in the United States. And they wanted to compete directly with several other different Alexa skill recipe sites, have you. So the way they did this is that they say you can Chromecast you can cast your screen, right? And while you're cooking, because you don't want to, be in the middle of making cookie dough and then have to stop and then like wipe your hand off and then go to the next page to see what the pictures are of your step, you just say, okay, Alexa, next step. She would speak, and then there would be a picture of the next step on the Chromecast the whole time happening. And they did that also through WebSockets, right? So there's lots of cool opportunities to do some parallel technology there. This is basically what the intent JSON looks like, at least the first half of it anyway. I don't want to reveal too much, right? Inside of your interaction model object, you'll have a language model. This language could be German, Dutch, whatever. By default, it will just say you don't differentiate, meaning it will use it for all of them. So in this case, regardless of the language, I would like this to be a response for all of them, so I did not indicate that I wanted this specifically for like British UK, right? Invocation name, you'll see, is right next to it. And then you have an array of intents. Lots of fun. But this is the least amount of JSON you need in order to structure what we just had earlier today. Okay, this is an example of the inside of there under name. You'll see Amazon.cancel intent is a built-in intent. You don't have to come up with all the ways that a user can want to exit. They've done that for you. You just get to override it. So instead of it just stopping, you could say, great, cheerio, and then you leave. That's a good example. There's also a help intent. There's a couple of different ones. And this was just an example of how you would indicate that instead of it being a custom one you've built, you'd like to override the one that's there. And then inside of that intent object, you'd also have an array of samples, however the user would say that. You good? Okay. Here's the other part of that. There's also slots. Okay? Slots are just for user input that you need that will be different. Okay? And usually these slots are tied to some sort of list. The best example of a list that I can think about is like, what are the months of the year? January, February, etc. There's only so many. It's finite. And so usually this will be an easy way to add all of those in here. But you can imagine that if you were to add something like, oh, I don't know, all the addresses in Stockholm might be a little bit long of a list. So instead of doing that, I've decided to use the search query data type. These are just like, imagine every object, inherits from object, right? It's the same way for all of Amazon's objects. And so inside, this is called search query, which is just a wildcard slot. You have to give examples of how the user would phrase it, as you see down at the bottom. For example, when I was telling her what to say, this is literally the samples that I gave to Amazon of how the user might approach that. And then whenever the user basically stops speaking, I like to think about it as like the 1 second breath and pauses. That's the end of the wildcard phrase. Okay. Now, it doesn't really go very long. I have found that more than 10 words tend to be a little bit too much, but most users will only say like a phrase, just say something really quick. And this is a great way to capture feedback. So if you wanted to know how in a sentence, tell us, did you enjoy this presentation? And they could say yes, like, oh, I thought it was great, or anything like that. So you can capture a little bit more in detail about what your user wanted or needed. And what's even cooler about that is if you didn't think about all the possible different questions a user could ask, this is a great way to be a default fallback to capture other ones. And saying, hey, we didn't have an intent built in for that, but we get a lot of users that say this thing. Maybe we should build an intent for that. So it's great for continuous integration. Okay. Any questions? We good? Cool. All right. This is an example in a phrase of the use of a slot as well. So if you'll notice that the name of the intent, which is what I will use inside of our code, is get horoscope, right? And the utterance itself is give me the horoscope for, and then the slot or the sign, right? It's pretty simple, but just so you understand, this is how you would break it down. So if you were to look at the actual JSON structure inside of your portal, it would be structured just like that. The intent, like the trigger, would be in front, and then whatever the utterance is, and then whatever slot you would have. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So let's talk about making, let's see. Hopefully I'm not running out of time. I think we're okay, right? Yes? Okay. Good deal. All right. Let's see if I can make something really quick. Let's make a basic skill. So the first thing you're going to need, I just went ahead and file new project, web API. Okay. This is the full framework version. Okay. This is not .NET Core. This is .NET 4X, whichever one it is. The first thing I did was I added a new controller, and I added it as my Alexa controller, just so that this API can be /Alexa. It's a little bit easier to do it that way. And then I'm going to show you how little code you need. All right? I'm not talking about discussing how you need to make this a nicely abstracted API. That is up to you. I'll have an example of one later. But I want to show you how little you need to actually get her to work. Okay? All right. All I did was add a route for demo, and I created a dynamic object that returned a JSON object that had a version. Session attributes, which is just a key value pair storage if you want to store it as the session goes. And a response object. There's the output speech that you want her to say, the type that it was, and the card that I want to display inside of the app. But the most important thing you need to pay attention to here is this right here. If you say false, she continues to listen. Okay? So you make sure that you set it to true, because that is expected whenever you are to publish the skill, that once you are done and complete with the conversation, that you will close the microphone session. Otherwise, you will not be able to be accepted into the store. Got it? Cool. So if you notice, there's just not a lot there. I didn't even make a new C# object for this. I just newed up a dynamic one because I couldn't be bothered on my first go-round to even do that. There are plenty of wonderful libraries out there. Alexa.net is also a library you can pull down that already has pre-formatted objects for you, that already knows the JSON requests and responses that you need. I find that it's important to start with this and realize that all this is a REST call. Okay? That's all it is. What is interesting, though, is that there's nothing for me to call into initially. Like, I don't have an endpoint for Amazon's system. Amazon has my endpoint. So we are waiting for the initial call. So you don't get to, out of nowhere at 2 in the morning, just say, hey, you need to wake up, and such like that. You can't just start a user's echo device, okay? The user has to invoke your skill, okay? Cool. So the reason why the version is important here is beyond my knowledge, but if you take it away, it doesn't work, so there you are. And session attributes are very cool. So anytime that this was kind of put in here for people who didn't want to use a database to keep track of things during a session. I think you should always save information from the user because you never know when it can accidentally end. But there you can just put a simple key value pair of like, did they complete step 1? It could be a bool, like true or false. Did they complete step 2, 3, 4? So while the user is talking back and forth, you can update that session attribute list. And you can set it and also receive it. So it's something that you set, but you also read whenever you get that initial request. Very good? Cool. So yeah, so this is all that you needed for that. And this is the skill that I built basically right before you all came into the room. Pretty quick. I think it's interesting that that's all you need, right? It makes .NET a really ideal platform for this, I think. It makes .NET to be a natural choice for a lot of larger enterprise companies that already have a nice big infrastructure and just want to extend their existing web service to also support a voice device. Because then you can just add another controller, just specifically for her, and then reuse all of your business logic that you've got already. Or just do a little bit more. Do I have any questions? No? Yes? Cool. So now that I kind of showed you that, I know it's really, for me, I like to have everything on one screen, but I want it big enough for you to read, so hopefully that's good. This is what it would kind of look like. This is my dual one. This is what it would kind of look like to share a controller between more than one voice device. So I have both Google Assistant and Alexa inside of my service. As long as they have different endpoints, that's all that matters. Right? So they actually ended up sharing a lot of functionality. So what you're seeing here is I just took whatever the JSON response format was, turned it into just a POCO, okay, just a plain old C# object. Okay, that's all it is. If you want, we can all go into that class and look at it. But I promise you, it's what's default on the website. This is the response structure. This is what you need to fill up. If you notice right here, I do a check for the type of request it is. Okay, so now we're doing a little more, right? Now I'm making decisions based on some of the data that's coming in. Here I just do a basic switch on, and remember, this is not crazy huge architecture. This is just the basics that you need. Now I'm doing a switch on whether or not they're launching it for the first time, like welcome Heather, versus they're just launching an intent. That means I don't have to worry about the pleasantries. I can just go into taking care of them. Or if they're ending it, I might want it to be in like a separate area. Okay, so I've just created a nice class of request handlers, and I pass the request to them. Right? So inside of each one, I think the most interesting one is probably the intent one. Inside of the intent handlers, hopefully you guys can see that. All right. This was an example of the back and forth that I did with Google Assistant, where Google Assistant played the role of Kylo Ren from Star Wars and Alexa was Rey. So what I showed here is in comments specifically to tell the developer where we were in this conversation. That is really what it's for. Yes, you should be able to just read the code and understand it, but I found for conversational apps, using comments is very helpful. To know what it is you're trying to do, okay? And here's also something, if you noticed, a reprompt, okay? So all I'm doing is I'm walking down the JSON structure here to fill this out. I just thought it looked nicer to be able to separate it this way, okay? You can also see something very similar if you use the Alexa.NET SDK, all right? This is how little I needed to fill out. If it's just a plain response, I just put it in quotes and you're good to go. Okay? Here's the title, and this title and the content will show up in that card. Okay? The output speech for the reprompt is very important. If the user says nothing, after a couple of seconds, the reprompt will fire. Okay? So that's to get the user to say the next thing. And this particular session is false. That means that I want Alexa to keep listening because I'm not finished with the conversation yet. Okay? So as you see here, it's not as small as we had before, but it's still pretty concise, right? This one's probably the most fun because I wanted to know how to get that wildcard thing that the user said. The one that I didn't really know what they were going to say, and I wanted to pull it out. One little tidbit of information is that normally there's a little bit of extra machine learning that Lex, which is what powers the Alexa NLP engine, does on top of anything the user says in order to match it with your intents. But in a wildcard speech, like I call it that, it's just called a search query. They don't perform any of that. It is straight up speech to text. So you get what they heard, no other kinds of logic or algorithms are ran on it, which is good, but that just means that you have to be the one to handle that if you need it. So if you're interested in how to pull it out, you just go inside of the request object, inside of the intent object, and inside of slots, you can grab the value of that slot, and I just put it to a string, because at that point in time, it was still an object, it was not a string yet. Okay? So once I grabbed that, that's how I was able to just spit out whatever was said. Okay? Pretty cool. I mean, that's not very complicated, is it? Just a little bit of this and that. Yes? Any questions? Are we good? Cool. All right. So now that I've shown you all the crazy amounts of code it took for me to have this conversation, let's go into some other options that we have. Okay? Let's talk about expression. What about that? Because I found that, especially in the case of the early days of Alexa, she would say things in a rather wooden manner. You know, didn't seem like it was the tone that I really liked. So I started looking into whether or not it was possible to alter her voice. Very pleased to say it absolutely is the case. And we have something called SSML. So SSML stands for Speech Synthesis Markup Language. It is a W3 spec, and it has been around for 15 years. Surprise. This has been used before, but just on a lot of proprietary software. It's not nearly as prolific as, of course, all of the Alexa skill systems are now. But if you look at this, if you look at these examples, what does it remind you of? Kind of like HTML, kind of like inline CSS. Did anybody remember that? Yes, it is CSS for your voice. Very cool. So the best example of this that I had was back and forth. I was able to lower the tone of, and this is something that can be used not just on Alexa, but on Google Assistant. All voice skills that you can build will recognize SSML. So that means you can write it once and use it other places, which is very cool. I was able to lower the pitch and the tone, and I was able to interpret things differently as they came in. Like, I was able to completely change the whole feel. This is a great place for your displaced visual front-end developers to go, because they can spend a lot of time making Alexa sound a certain way. It's very cool. So don't worry, it isn't just the back-end developers that get to work on this. If you're interested more about that, you should go to w3.org and look up the official specs on this. It's fascinating. And as these voice systems have grown, we have found that each system will add their own special tags. The best one that is the most fun is that Amazon has a proprietary SSML tag called Whisper. Because why would you not want to scare everybody? It's wonderful. If you need some additional references about anything that I have talked about today, there's 3 ones I want you to consider looking at. The first one is intent sequencing. So now that you've said one intent, how do you know whether to go to the next one? You know, what about state management? This is a great article on FreeBusy about how to manage that process, and it actually isn't that bad once you take a look at it from that angle. The second one is an example of using audio within your skill. So if you want to do little little clips of something like, I don't know, the sound of the Enterprise taking off, Like if you wanted something like a little 30-second clip or less in the middle of your skill, you can. And there's an example of that on Bespoken. The last one is the skill that was my first skill that I wrote that's still on my GitHub, and that is the LCARS skill. So is anybody here a Trekkie? Anyone in the room? A couple of you? Basically, LCARS is the name of the computer system on board the USS Enterprise. I noticed how much Alexa sounded like that computer, and so I was like, oh, well, wouldn't it be great if I could do things like, computer, start this, or, engage, and I could say different things. And so it was the very first skill that ended up being out in the store and then subsequently pulled for copyright reasons because I'm not that company. But it was the first one that went out that had anything to do with Star Trek. And so if you're interested in how I did it, it's out on my GitHub, and it's great fun to just pull down and start messing around. It has examples of using audio, SSML, a whole bunch of different little math scenarios, wildcards, several that have just fine lists. So if you're interested in the different ways that you might use it, it's very easy to understand because it was done a little bit ago, and hopefully you can pull it down and enjoy. So the last thing I'd like to leave you with is that, this last year was a year that 30% of our interactions will be with smart machines. That also has been surpassed. So most of the interactions with technology now are 42% on our machines. 42%. A little crazy. I didn't understand how much voice searches could go up. So voice search is currently used more often than typing in Google right now. A little nuts. And it has only increased because, why? It's easier for me to ask, hey, when was this person born? What is the name of this big building in the middle of Stockholm? All of these different things was easier for me to say than sit here and type with my fingers. It doesn't always work that way, but lately the technology has just gotten better and better. And hopefully you're interested a little bit in what we have. Just remember that the various user responses are opportunities. They're not errors. You need to delight them. And don't think about it so much as, stop, you didn't do my happy path. In the future, we're all going to be judged on our developmental abilities to embrace all the edge cases. So, in conclusion, you have to create what? Cooperative conversational experiences, learn the market, and find what value you can provide in it. Keep your skills really short and to the point, and you got to start building your prototypes now. You should be able to do this in the weekend, even with very little knowledge, even the knowledge I just showed you today. It really is very easy to get started, and once you have that under your belt, instead of your manager or your company saying, oh, we need to hire a voice developer, you can say, I've got that tool in my tool belt. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, hit me on Twitter.